I think I have to say, though, my favorite part was you can tell it's an aspen tree because of the way it is. Oh, my heavens. That's one of my favorite YouTube videos of all time right there. So now, all day today, we can just say, how neat is that? Yep, it's going to happen. Get ready. Because just how neat is that? All right, everybody, do you have your worksheets from last time? If you didn't, I've got some extras. Anybody need an extra? Anybody else need one? Wow. You guys win all the points. Like, I've always had to hand out at least a half a dozen on the day 2 of this, so kudos to you guys. We've even got less of you in here, so statistically speaking, we're in the win. All right. What did I do with my pen? There it is. Okay. So let's recap real quickly to make sure we remember the format of floating point, okay? So just as a general explanation for you today, we're going to spend half of the day roughly dealing with floating points again, going the other direction, talking about characteristics of them, some limitations of them, you know, exploring, starting into the why, explore the whys a little bit of floating point numbers. And then we are going to switch topics a little bit and talk about error correction and detection. That's pretty well cover us all the way through the weekend to get you ready for your quiz this weekend, okay? So, do you guys remember, what's the name of the standard we're using for floating point numbers? IEEE. Do you remember which IEEE? Because that's the organization. So which standard was it now? All right, IEEE 754. Excellent work. Okay, now the format itself is broken down into how many pieces? 3 pieces. Yep. Okay. What were they? Right. Starting with the most significant digit we have, and then working our way down. We have bit number 1, which is our sign, right? The most significant digit represents our sign. 0 for positive or negative? 0 is positive, right? And 1 is negative. Okay. What other areas is this broken down into? Yes, we have the exponent field. Okay, and how many bits? 8. Okay, and lastly, the mantissa, right? Which also has another name. That's the original name, was the mantissa. And the significant, yeah. And that's how big? 23, good. I'm just going to do that. I actually wrote out all 23 last time, but really not feeling it this morning. A lot of X's. Okay. All right. So today now we want to explore how do we go the other direction, right? Going from hexadecimal to decimal is what we did last time. It wasn't too bad, but the format itself needs to support going in both directions, right? We should be able to cyclically change a number from one to the other, to the other, to the other, in between any base. And if our format is working correctly, we should never lose any data, right? We should maintain precision and accuracy with every conversion, okay? So if we were to explore a number, such as, let's look at the first one on your worksheet there, okay? Negative 2560.5. Okay, now our goal is to encode this data in IEEE 754. How would you guys suggest now, right? You've got a little bit of an experience under your belt on Tuesday. Okay, so let's start applying some critical thinking skills. What do you suggest we need to do if we want to take this number from decimal format and encode it in IEEE? Okay, we need to get it into binary, right? That's the ultimate goal. So how do I, what parts, what do you mean? Can you give me a little bit more perhaps? How do we get it into binary? What, convert what to hex?
The whole number.
The whole number, absolutely, okay. Why can't I convert the whole thing to hex? Yeah, 'cause this guy, does he exist in hex all by himself? No, that's the point, the whole point of the IEEE 754 floating point single precision number, right? Is to allow us to compensate for that decimal point there. So we do need to figure out, okay, what is this portion here? Yes, okay. Now we don't want to just encode negative 2560 into hex though, do we? What is it we want to take into hex? Think about what we did with 2's complement when we had the negative numbers that we needed to encode. We didn't encode the negative number. We encoded the absolute value of the number, right? Essentially saying we want to take just the positive equivalent of the whole number. Now, if our number is positive, then it's our problem solved, right? But by saying the absolute value of the floor, it would be the technical term we would use, right? Now, does everybody understand what we say when we say we're flooring a number in computer science? Okay? For those of you that don't, I only got 2 hot head nods, yes, so I'm going to assume the rest of you is a blank stare. Okay? When we floor a number, we are removing the decimal point. We're just abandoning it and keeping the integer portion. Okay? We're taking it to the floor, back to its lowest point without the decimal point. Okay, so we're eliminating that. So we're going to take the absolute value. That way, it compensates for whether the negative or positive, and encode that floored value now. Okay, so in this case, what does that mean in practical terms? What is it that we're going to figure out how to put into hex, and then eventually into binary? What portion of this number? Yeah, just the whole number without the negative, right? So 2,560. We need to take this guy. Let's get it into hex so that we can get it into binary. Could I go directly to binary if I wanted to? Yeah, absolutely. It's just a lot more work. I mean, hex is a middleman for a reason, so let's let him do his job, okay? Yep, and binary is a lot more error prone. That's the whole reason we go away from binary whenever we can, right? That's why you guys don't program in switches and punch cards anymore. All right, so how do we convert then 2560 in to hex and then to binary? What's that process look like?
Divide by greatest common. Divide by 256.
Yeah, we want to pull it out by the greatest factor, you know, the highest positional value that this number will support, right? Okay. So in this case, we need how many hexadecimal digits then? We've got 3 hexadecimal digits because when we pull out factors of 256, as Bruce pointed out, we get how many? We got an A, right? We got 10, okay? So we're going to pull out A. So if I represent A in the 256 position, how much is left? 0. Why? Right, exactly. When we multiply out back A times 256, we've represented the entire number in one fell swoop. Absolutely. Okay. So we've got A00. But was hex the ultimate goal? What was the goal? Binary, right. So we want to get into binary so that we can put a decimal into it, put the sign in it, and encode the whole thing all together, right? Okay. So what does this look like in binary then? Yeah, 1 0 1 0 and then 8 zeros. Like that, right? Because that is, we were to write it underneath, right? A0 0. Okay. You guys are hopefully working on that memorization, right? Of the jumps between those bases, especially the hex to binary. That's critical. All right. Okay, so I have the absolute value of the floored equivalent of my number, i.e., I have just the whole integer positive version of my number. Now what? Yeah, we need a decimal portion in here, right? So even though decimal doesn't exist in binary, we need the concepts of it. So we are going to put in a decimal point, okay? But how do I take and put 0.5 into binary. Yeah. Right, we do, it's descending positional value now, right? So we get 0.1, right? Because what is the positional value of this? 2 to this minus 1, which once we flip it and calculate it, that's 1/2, right? Which is 0.5. Okay. All right. Now comes the new bit. Okay. Do you remember last time I asked you to just trust me with something? Right? There was a reason we had a process. Do you remember what that process was? I said you have to trust me with denormalization, right? Because we hadn't learned normalization yet. Okay. Now, this first time through, I'm just going to show you what normalization is. It's not going to be blindingly obvious yet why we do it, but as we do a couple of examples, it will become very clear why we do it. I'll explain it too, but as we do a little bit more, you'll become more comfortable with it, okay? So the concept of normalization is present to protect us, okay? And to simplify everything and to make it easier to store numbers more accurately. So what normalization is the process of figuring out the bias, meaning how many times did we move the exponent, i.e., or the decimal point, so that we can eventually get to our exponent field, right? We're trying to figure out how many times I moved that decimal point. Now, when you did scientific notation, this is where things got a little bit trickier, right? In scientific notation, is this valid notation? If I said, say, 2.14 times 10 to the 4th. Is that valid scientific notation? Okay. What if I said something like, why not? Okay. Right. It's all about this position, right? Why are you saying it's invalid to put the decimal point in the middle? Yeah, it's not simplified, okay? Now, the danger comes in computers when we don't simplify it all the way, we end up with multiple ways to represent the same thing, okay? Because if we said 1456.978 times 10 to the negative 2, are there multiple ways I could write the exact same number now in scientific notation by just moving, say, the decimal point and changing my exponent? Is that a problem, though? I've got some of you saying yes, some of you saying no. Let's hear some arguments. Why yes problem?
Same numbers, or try to use a similar number. Scientists try to recreate something with that number. They did 1456, 97.8. It'll be different.
Yeah, there's opportunities for inconsistencies. Okay, how about those of you who say not a problem? Why do you say that?
Same reason. I mean, there's 1456.9 negative 2 is the same number as 14,197.8.
Mm-hmm. Okay. The what?
For computers, I guess.
Well, it's actually a problem in both places, but it is a bigger problem for computers. Okay. But let's explore this idea just a little bit more. Now, is that number the same? If I were to write it, say 1456.978 times 10 to the negative 2, which means I'm going to take my decimal point and bring it over here. So would that be the same thing as writing 14.56978? Are these identical? There's 2 of you nodding yes. The rest of you should be going yes. Those are the same number, right? Okay, but what's the point of using scientific notation for something like this? Would you ever use scientific notation for a number as simple as that? You're going to use scientific notation for larger values, and that's when things start to become a problem, right? Or smaller values, either direction, because it can go both ways. The scientific notation allows us to easily represent very large values or very small values now, okay? So the odds of creating a mistake, one, increase substantially, and two, now when you're trying to use it, it's much more difficult to tell if it's the same thing or not the same thing. Now, mathematically speaking, it's the same number, so who cares, right? But we've got to realize computers, though, are more than just calculators. They're used for more things than that, and there's more involved with them than just the ALU that does the math. Specifically, the biggest weakness to a computer. If somebody were to come to you and say, what's the biggest weakness in a computer, what would you guys say it was? Pardon? Okay, the fact that it uses binary. It only does exactly what you tell it to do. Any other ideas? Both are valid, good answers, absolutely. In short, the biggest weakness of a computer, and I'm probably going to offend somebody here, but I'm going to do it anyways. Okay? Anybody watch Tron? Years ago? That's a good... Either one. I'm thinking more of the newest one, because it's got several memorable quotes. Yeah. Okay. Now, if you ever remember watching it, the only reason to bring it up is they said this word in a very specific way in there, right? Which was the biggest weakness of a computer, always has been, and always will be, until AI comes to fruition, and then it goes away, because we've eliminated it. And at that point, we realized the biggest reason we can't have multiple ways of representing the same problem is because of the biggest weakness within a computer. Specifically, you, the user, or in our case, the programmer. Okay? Because what's the likelihood of the computer screwing up the mathematical operations? Very minimal. Does it happen? Sure. Absolutely. On a daily basis. In fact, that's one of the reasons we're going to explore that a little bit later today. Computers actually make mistakes far more often than you realize. They're just really good at catching it and fixing it before you notice. Okay? But the biggest reason and the biggest struggle we have in a computer now is you. The person that's writing the software has to be able to make sense of the logic and see the data and understand when two things are different or when two things are the same. Okay? It's one of the reasons we explore floating point numbers. As you see, as we go a little bit farther in today too, you'll start to see this. Floating point numbers, while very useful because they allow us to represent fractional numbers, are actually very dangerous at the same time, okay, because of the way they work. So, does that make sense though, right? So we need to be careful when we do this. So when we normalize a number, we are standardizing it so that the decimal point will always be in the same place. Okay, that's reason number one for normalization, is to make sure the decimal point is always in the same place. The second reason we normalize a number is it saves us a bit. Literally, it saves us a bit. Okay, which when we save a bit, what does that do to our ability to store a number? Does it increase or does it decrease? Now there's more space, so we have increased our ability to store a number, right? Specifically, we have doubled the amount of numbers that we can store, right? Every time we add a single bit, we are doubling our capacity. So while it may seem silly to split hairs over a single bit, that single bit actually can have a large influence on the number, okay? So we normalize for two reasons. Now, what were they again? Let's see if you guys have been listening. We normalize because it saves us a bit, and we standardize where the decimal is in the number, right? So that we end up with the location where there's only one leading integer to the left. Okay? Now, now that you know why we normalize, let's talk about what that means. It's very simple, actually. Normalization is the process of moving the decimal point to the immediate right of the leading 1. Okay? So in this case, if we look at this number, my leading 1 is where? We're on the A right here, right? In fact, why don't I change colors to make it a little bit easier to see? Okay? This is our leading 1. Okay? So I want to move my decimal point to the right, the immediate right of my leading 1, i.e. my decimal point needs to go right here between my 1 and the 0. Okay? Like this. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and 11. Now we know we need to then store an 11 plus a little, plus compensating into the exponent field. Okay. Now, why do you suppose we put the 1 in the period back, or on the number, or on the significand when we denormalized? Okay, if we're putting it back when we denormalize, we're taking it away here, right? We are going to remove it because we will always put it back. Therefore, we have saved the bit because we know it always exists. There is always that 1. It is assumed to be present. In fact, it's guaranteed to be present. The only exception to that rule, there's 3 exceptions to that rule. Okay? Maybe 4, depending on how you want to argue it, but IEEE also has several reserved values. Okay? Because what's the problem of putting a 1 back and always having a 1 there? Can anybody think of a problem that would create? We can't store 0, right? So we have to invent what we call a special case for 0. So whenever you see all zeros, that means the value 0. Okay, when all the bits are off, that means the value 0. And we don't go through these processes at all. We just go, okay, it's a 0. Except when there is a 1 in the most significant digit and everything else is 0, then we have -0. Okay. Does that make sense? It's weird. It's supported because technically what the computer is looking for is all zeros in the exponent field and all zeros in the significand. If it sees zeros in both of those places, it assumes 0. So that creates a positive and a -0. In fact, if you did comparisons between the two of them, they would not result in equal values. You can do some crazy stuff for that. The other special cases we're not going to go into them, but just so that you're aware exist, is positive infinity and negative infinity. And then we also have a NaN, so we'll throw that in there too. Well, it's a little bit differently than that, but that's the general idea, okay? Is we're going to reserve specific pieces for those values, okay? Huh? I don't know. I've never actually tried it. Might be later this weekend. We'll see how my research paper I'm writing goes. Okay. So, but the big idea is we want to normalize the number so that our decimal is always in that same place, and that 1 comes back. Okay. Now, what are we going to do with this 11, i.e., the number of places we moved our decimal point? We are going to add 127. Now, why am I going to add 127? Yeah, because it's the midpoint of our exponent field, right? Remember we said half is going to go one direction and half will mean going the other way. 127 is a half of 255 when you use integer division, right? Well, when integer division doesn't count for the halves. If we did floating division, then yeah, more or less. So absolutely. So because it's half, we need to compensate for the fact that 0 is actually 127, meaning don't move the decimal point is at 127. So when we're going this way, we add it. When we're going the other way, we remove it. Does that make sense? Okay. So we add 127, which means what is it that I'm really going to really encode inside of the exponent field? 138. We're going to take a 138 decimal, right? Okay. Now, how many of you can instantly translate a 138 decimal into binary? Yeah, pretty much none of us, right? Some people can, and it's crazy. But what might you do to make it easier to get there? Yeah, let's drop it into hex, right? What does this look like in hex? Okay, now how did you come to 8A? That was a huge logical shortcut. So let's slow that down for those of the people that couldn't make that fast jump. How did you get there? Right, so if we do the division, right? We say how many factors of 16 can I pull out? The limit is 8. I cannot pull any more than 8, right? Which happens to be, of my 138, when I represent 8, I've represented 128, right? Which leaves me with 10 left to put in the ones position. Okay? All right? Cool. So we've got 8A to put in. Now, to assemble the IEEE 754, what 3 components do you need to know then? Sign. Do we know the sign? It's a negative number. Therefore, our sign bit is 1. Okay. What else do we need to know? The exponent field. Do we know the exponent field? Yeah, it's 8A, right? And lastly, you need to know what? Mantissa / significant. Okay. Do you know the mantissa / significant? We do. Where is it? The what? This. Everything that we didn't delete. Do you see the relationship to what you did when we went backwards, right? When we were going the other day, we put 1 point, moved it all over, and then dropped the significant down, right? This time, we're going to get rid of the 1 dot, and everything that's left is going to become our significant. Now, we have a problem, though, here, okay? We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 bits. The significant was how many bits again? 23. Uh-oh. Sugar. It doesn't fit. Okay, so we're going to just go, we're going to add in a whole bunch of zeros. Something along those lines.
Zeros towards the end.
Why?
Because we're going to truncate them eventually do the normalization to the last 1.
Yeah, we won't need, because anytime I put a 0 onto this end, right? The reason I can truncate it is because of the reason I put them on the same reason I put them on this side, right? Which is what? Why do we put them over here? Yeah, they don't change the actual number, which is why we can truncate them, okay? Why don't I put them here? I mean, we put leading zeros to the left earlier, and it didn't change anything. But it's not just a decimal point that's coming there, is it? It's a 1 and a decimal point, right? So every time if you were to put a 1 over here, you would then be shifting everything 1 positional value further down, i.e. you'd be cutting it in half every time you put a 0 up front. Okay, because when we took the decimal point and we moved it over, it would be 1 plus a whole bunch of zeros before we finally start getting to the data, okay? So we can put extra zeros here safely. Because that's the same as like for when you write money, for example, instead of saying $1.99, that would be saying 1.990000000000. It's the same thing. Okay?
If we're not considering the fact that we're going to truncate it, doesn't that also add to the positional value? So the next one is widely different from the number that we got from here?
Not if I put them on this side.
Why not?
Okay? Because the side of the decimal point that you're adding it to is what changes it. Okay? I can only put bits on the left if they are in front of any actual values. Okay? So, for example, let's look at it, okay? Let's say we had 1001 like this, okay? And I padded in, hypothetically, let's throw up a an easily erasable thing, okay? What if I put, how many do we have? 12? Wait, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Okay. Now, why is this going to cause a problem? Let's explore this. Well, when I denormalize, where does the decimal go? It doesn't go in the end. It goes here with my 1, right? Then I move my decimal point. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Has my number changed pretty substantially? Okay, what are you asking then?
On the right, we're adding them at the beginning of the binary constant. We're doing it at the beginning of the number where you're pointing it. Why doesn't that change the positional value?
On this side, when I put them on the right?
Why doesn't that change the value? And throughout all of the classes, you've been talking about this positional value, not going further and further, changing it more.
Mm-hmm. It's because of the position of the decimal point. Okay, now think about it mathematically. Let's chase this just a second longer, and then we'll circle onto this, okay? Because it'll make more sense this way. Why did this change the value? Because because now there's a 1 and a decimal point here with all of these zeros. Actual values shifted downstream, right? The stuff that had a value, right? I should have had, say, a quarter, or whatever. Those have all moved downstream, right? Now they are significantly smaller by half the number of bits that I've stuck in here because there is an actual value and a decimal point here between the real values I want to keep, okay? Now, why can I add values over here, for example, as many as I want? It doesn't change anything. Why, Brian? Because we're not moving any decimal points, and we're not moving, what's more important though, we're not moving any actual values, okay? We're putting just blank values in positional values that aren't going to actually affect the number now, okay? Because this is saying, for example, I'm going to add, 2 to the negative 4, 2 to the negative 5, 2 to the negative 6, 2 to the negative 7, 2 to the negative 8, 2 to the negative 9, and they're all 0. When I add that into the number, nothing changes. Okay, it's much the same as decimal. If I were to write something like 1.99, is this the same as saying 1 point? Those all the same? Yeah, but is this the same? No, and that's where it matters where we put it in, because that's the difference we're saying, is padding on here or padding here. Now, earlier, the difference is with signed integers, for example, or even yesterday or Tuesday when we were adding some zeros, we were doing them over here. This is allowable for the same reason I can add zeros over here. It doesn't change the actual number. Okay? I can't, the problem is though, I cannot inject them in the middle of the number. Okay? Does that answer your question? Awesome. Okay, so how do we finish off this example? It's only taken us a half an hour so far this morning. Yep.
That number and the number that we have there.
Yeah, we just need to assemble the pieces. We have all of the pieces now, right? Our sign is 1. Then we have our exponent field. And then now we bring in our significand. Plus however many extra zeros we have, right? How many zeros do we need? And we need 11 more.
No.
Because this guy is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. So if we add 11 more to that 12, we get 23. Now, there will not be a correlation. There's not a correlation, so don't get confused. It just was lucky-ish, okay? There's not generally a correlation between this number and the number of zeros you add, okay? Because there could be more, who knows how many things. There could be significant variance between the two, okay? Between the fact that we ended up with 11 here, our bias of 11, the number of times we moved the decimal point, just was coincidence that we had to add 11 ones down here. There's 11 zeros, yeah.
0.01
Yeah, say for example, this was 0.75 instead. Our decimal point still would have moved the same amount, but I would have had an extra 1 right here on the end. And then I would have only needed 10 down here. So don't think, oh, I'll just add this many. Always count to make sure. Okay, now what? Are we done yet? Now we need it just in a value we could read. The computer is done. We're not. Okay, because we're users. Okay, so let's group it into hex. Okay, now I recommend when you do your grouping, start over here on this side and go this way in case you miscounted your zeros. Otherwise, if you end up and say for example, you left a 0 off here and you group everything and you've got a missing digit over here, you don't want to add a 0 to this side because that changes everything. Okay.
Separate your little boxes.
Yep, absolutely. So, what is the hexadecimal equivalent of 2560.5? See, what is this? C. 5, 2, 0, 0, 8, 0, 0. Now, how could you guarantee accurate, that those two are in fact duplicates? Assuming your calculator works. But yeah, we would need to do the conversion, right? Both directions. Because if I go this way and that's what I end up with, but then I go this way and that's what I end up with, then we know they're identical because they're cyclic, okay? I'm not going to make you do that this morning because I don't want to spend that much time on just one example. But that's what you would do, okay? All right. Do you guys want to do one more together? Or do you, okay. Let's do one more together. Then I'll let you do one on your own, and then we'll start exploring the Y's, and I'll start throwing you a couple of curveballs. Okay? Let's do... Hold on, I'm gonna change this a little bit. Let me pull a calculator here real fast. I'm going to do one that's not on the worksheet here so that we can practice something that otherwise you would miss. Oops. Yeah. Let's do that. Yeah, this is not the one on the page because I want us to explore something as we do this one, consolidate things so we don't have to do quite so many examples together. Okay, so what can you tell me about this number? It's a positive number, right? Okay, our sign bit is there going to be 0. Okay, awesome. So we know it is positive. Okay, now what do I do? Yeah, let's look at the integer portion. Let's take it into hex. Okay, how many digits? 4. Why 4? Yeah, because we're bigger than 4096, but less than the next positional value, which is 65,536. Right. How many factors of 4096 or 16 to the third? Good. Can I pull out? We pull out 1. Okay. So from our 5432, we have pulled out 4096, which means we have how much left to do? 1,000 what? 1336. Okay. How many factors of, what's this spot worth? 256. How many factors of 256 can we pull out here? 5. Good. Which means we just represented how much? 1,000. Yeah. 1280. Good. Leaves us a balance of? Pardon? 56. So how many factors of 16? Good. Can I pull out? Okay, which means I represented how many? What's 3 times 16? 48. Leaving us a balance of 8. Survey says? Awesome. Okay, 1538. Gives us the whole number portion, yes? Okay, so we need to get it in what base, though, for us to look at here? Binary. All right, so 0, 0, 0, 1. What's 5? 0, 1, 0, 1. A 3. Yeah, 0, 0, 1, 1. And then an 8. 1, 0, 0, 0. Good. Okay, now that represents there's our whole number, right? Except now we're missing some steps. Now we need to bring in the decimal portion in binary. Now, this is going to throw a little bit more of a curveball at you now. Okay, 0.6875. How do we do this? How do we take a decimal value like that and break it into binary?
You do the same thing when you do 1 over 2 to whatever.
Yeah, so we're going negative powers now, right? Okay, so let's just start and see how many it takes, okay? So this one, 2 to the negative 1, is worth 1/2 or 0.5. Can I, from 0.6875, can I subtract 0.5? Therefore, I have 1, right? I put a 1 here because I'm going to represent 0.5. What's left?
0.18.
Point what? 0.1875, yes? Okay, so I'm not done because I don't have a 0 there. What about this one? 2 to the what? -2, which is a quarter. Can I represent a quarter out of this? I.e., can I pull out 0.25? Can I pull that out? Uh-oh. We're going to keep going, but what do I put here? A 0. Good. And then let's keep going. 2 to the -3, or 1/8, which is 0.125. Awesome. Can I pull out 0.125 from 0.1875? Yeah. So let's subtract. Oops. 0.125. Leaving us a balance of 0.0625. Awesome. Okay, we put a 1 there because we represented it. Okay, 2 to the -4, or 1/16. What's a 16th? 0.0625. Can I? And then, obviously, if I subtract 0.0625, we're done. Right? Does everybody see how we got that fractional portion? That's one that tends to throw students for a loop a little bit. So I want to make sure you're comfortable with it. Okay? Yes?
Can you convert 5432 to binary and spend that again? Got lost that.
This portion here?
Yeah, down to the binary.
Yeah, so is what we did here is we took it into hex first, 1538, and then I translated 1538. Yeah, in hex. We just use this as a shortcut because otherwise you got to figure out what the highest positional value is, and you do the same thing, but then instead you're pulling it just factors of 2. So we would come in here and say, okay, well, what's this positional value? And I subtract it, and then work bit by bit by bit all the way down. It's just more time consuming to do in binary than it is in hex. All right. Now, what do we have here then? What's all of this? What is that? Not just the significand. It's a denormalized number, right? We need to do what to it? We need to normalize it. How do we do that? Again, I forgot. Hoping you guys can save me. Right, we put it immediate. We move the decimal point to the immediate right of the leading one. Absolutely, and we count how many spaces that is. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Write that down. Right, we move the decimal point 12 times, we normalize the number. Now, what does that mean then for this 1 and the 3 zeros to the left of it? All of them go away. Now, why would I want to get rid of the zeros too? They were just wasted space at that point, right? Why didn't I just put the decimal point always just right here? And just say it's always 1 digit in. Well, it could do, yeah. Especially when I put the 1 dot back, right? But what if I didn't do that? What if we got rid of the process of normalization and denormalization entirely, and we just said, you always, like scientific notation, you always just put it so there's 1 digit, and then it goes. Well, yeah, absolutely. We don't save the bit. It's not standardized. And now there's lots of ways to write the same number. So the things you guys do on a computer all the time, for example, comparisons. I can no longer just do a simple bit check comparison, right? I can't just check them. Instead, I would have to use a mathematical calculation and actually calculate the values and compare end results. You know, equality, less than, greater than, all those ranges or all those times, anytime you try to do logic on a floating point number, it would all go out the window if we could have multiple ways to represent the same number. So we got to have one way, one number, right? That's why we denormalize and we normalize, okay? Because we put it to the right of the leading one. Because we're going to delete the first one, or the most significant one, and everything to the left of it. So we find wherever that is, and that we move it however many times it takes to get it there. Okay. Now what? Right. Let's build ourselves an exponent field. Right? 12 plus 127, because that's our midway point. Okay? Meaning, we're going to encode a 139, right? Which, if we do that, right? Pull out a factors of 16. We can pull out 8 of those. Right? That's 128, leaving us a balance of B. 8B. Okay? All right. Now what? Yeah, let's just put the whole thing together, right? Okay. Now, if you want to pre-convert it to binary to make sure you're okay, you can, or if you want to just say, okay, my number was positive or negative? Positive. And then go 8b, you can, right? And then what goes here? Yeah, we bring in our mantissa or significand. So what is our mantissa / significand? Right. So starting here, right? Should I turn that one in red with that one in red? You probably can't see my mouse pointer very well. So starting here and going right, all of that is our significand, yeah? So 0, 1, 0, 1, 0, 0, 1, 1, 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 0, 1, 1. And now we need a number of zeros, right? Okay. Okay. Now what? We're almost done. Okay, let's convert it. So what do we have? Awesome. 45A9C580. Good work. Questions? Now, how neat is that? You've got some new nerd skills. You can go home and show your family members and be like, check it out. Yeah, we just took the mantissa portion, right? Which, if we do this, right? This is our mantissa right here, right? Because when we denormalize, we're making those go away. So the mantissa is what we're left with after we normalize the number. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Awesome. Other questions? Sweet. Okay.
How long did you say we have to do? I mean, how long is it to do each of these?
I've timed about 5 minutes apiece for these. So if you're in about the 5 minute range for a conversion on one of these, you're about where you should be. Now there will be several of these plus some questions about the stuff we'll talk about for the last little bit of class too. Okay, but we're at a great logical stopping spot. When we come back, okay, we're gonna take 5 minutes. When we get back, I'm gonna have you do another one, okay, and that'll help us explore some really important aspects of IEEE floating point numbers, okay, and then we'll move on to some other topics that we need to cover for today, okay? So go ahead and take 5 minutes, go get yourself some caffeine, do some jumping jacks, run some laps, catch a Pokemon, whatever you want to do, and we'll see you back here in 5 minutes. Oh, sugar. Oh, good. I did start the broadcast. For a minute there, I had a small panic attack, but I didn't push record. We'd lost the first half of class. I think we're just missing one more person. We'll give him 30 seconds more. Oh, there we go. Excellent. We got to couple it with the Burns fingers, right? Any Simpsons fans out there? Nobody? Really? What? You guys are making me feel old today. Nobody likes the Tron. Nobody likes the Simpsons. I never thought I was this old. Ah! Tron's awesome. You should. Ooh, Star Wars. I actually watched a really cool video this morning. I debated showing it, but have you guys heard that stupid song? I've got a 2-year-old, so we watch Moana every day. Hey, so you know what I'm talking about? That song by Dwayne Johnson, "You're Welcome." Like you can't say that phrase anymore without singing it. It's been stuck in my head all morning because I saw a Star Wars parody. Somebody rewrote it for Luke Skywalker singing it, and it's pretty funny. There's no animation with it, so I didn't dare show it this morning, but it's pretty funny. He made up all lyrics. It's all about Skywalker saying "You're welcome."
You want to get songs that people that parodies of Star Wars songs like that? Seagulls?
Yes, I was this close to showing that this morning. We might have to watch it Tuesday. That's probably one of my favorite songs of all time. Anybody seen that yet? Seagulls? Okay, remind me Tuesday we're watching Seagulls. It's your job to remind me. That's what we're watching for class, so don't ruin it. Okay, so let's keep going, shall we? Let's present a hypothetical situation, okay? Let's apply floating point numbers. You know the mechanics of how they work, so let's apply them for a second and see if we can discover how they work, okay? So one of the most common use cases when I ask students of, where you would use a floating point number is to describe money. Would you guys agree that that requires a floating point number or something of that nature, right, that allows a decimal point? So let's imagine you are writing the software for a cash register or a bank or McDonald's, whatever, right? I thought of McDonald's because I was out of milk this morning when I got up for breakfast. I'd been up since 5 with one of my kids, so I was like, I'm just going to go to McDonald's and get breakfast. So I stopped at McDonald's for breakfast this morning, and the bill for breakfast was $5.95. Okay, just enough to get a McGriddle and an orange juice. I don't know why, but I love McDonald's orange juice. That's like the best orange juice in the world. It's completely fake and horrible for me, but it tastes good. Okay, so you're writing the system. You've used floats. Go ahead and convert this number. Okay? Take a second and convert this into floating point. Based on the looks I'm starting to get, I think some of you are starting to discover a problem. Oh, stop it. Put my phone on mute instead of vibrate. Siblings are all trying to text me. Are you guys starting to notice a problem here? Uh-oh. Okay. Because can I represent a half? I can pull a half out, right? Okay, 0.95 minus 0.5 leaves me with point. Can I pull out a quarter? Yeah. Can I pull out an eighth?
Yeah.
16th? 32nd? 64th? 128th? So we have a couple of zeros for a while, and then we'll pop a zero, a one, and then some more zeros, and a one, and some more zeros, and some ones. What's wrong? This number is unrepresentable in a floating point number. What? Okay. Now, not only is this number, before I answer your question, okay, we're going to come back to that in a second. How about this, okay? I gave you $6, the cash register, and you typed in, okay, $6. That's easy to represent, minus 5.95. First, 5.95 can't be represented. Crap. Is that going to cause problems? People are going to be getting incorrect amounts of change. Our balance sheets aren't going to add up. You might think for a simple cash register, not a big deal. Now imagine this translates up to a bank. You're writing the software that's that's dealing with, say, 10 million transactions a day that are all off by even, say, a millionth of a penny. will it eventually start to add up to fairly big numbers? Yeah, it will. Now, let's say though I gave you $6, my change should be what? I should get a nice nickel, shouldn't I? Or 5 pennies, or, yeah, absolutely. Okay. Can you represent that? What? You can't represent that? Okay, how about this one? You've got to be able to represent this. This is an easy number. Okay. Come on. Does it get more basic in a floating point than 0.1? Can you represent that? How about 0.2? 0.3? 0.4? Uh-oh. So what's wrong? Why can't I store these values? Some days it does. I'll give you that. Absolutely. Some days binary blows chunks. But what's wrong? Why can't I represent them besides the fact of the limitations of binary? Now, is it really binary that's limiting me? It's the number of bits that we're utilizing that's limiting us. In fact, if we were to use a double instead, all of these would fit perfectly, okay? Because I'm targeting different things at that point. So with floating point numbers, though, we need to be aware that the same numbers, or that a lot of numbers, in fact, probably the majority of numbers, cannot be represented accurately. Okay? In fact, if we were to try to store something like 0.1, for example, we're going to end up with 0.09 something, 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 right? We're going to get close, but not all the way there. Okay? Or 0.05, I should say. Same thing, we'll get close, not all the way there. 5.95, we get close, but not all the way there. Yes. As you get, you may not have run into it now, but as you get out there and you start writing more things with decimals, especially, you'll find that as you use floating point numbers, that your mathematical operations are off. Okay. Now, who went wrong? You were the computer in that instance. No, you did. We chose to use a float. Okay. We learn how floats work so that you can learn that they're appropriate for some situations and not appropriate for others. Just like a 16-bit integer is appropriate for some places and a 64-bit integer is appropriate for other places. Okay? The way we store data in a computer is entirely dependent on what you need that thing to do. Okay? So if ever your computer is doing math wrong, okay, this is a blanket rule you can always apply. It's one of the very few blanket rules you can apply in computing. Okay, but if your computer is ever doing something wrong, whose fault is it? Yours. Sucks to be a nerd some days, doesn't it? Okay, honestly, that's just the way that it works. The computers, just as we pointed out earlier, just blindly follow what we tell it to do. So we have to know intimately what it is they're doing so that we can make sure they do it right. Okay? That's also one of the reasons we never use this operation with a float. Okay? Because what does this operation imply? When we put the double equal sign. They're equal, right? They're containing the same value. We could make strict equality, which is the same type and the same value. Now, why would I not want to use this with a floating point operation now? In fact, in some cases, it'll calculate the same number and it'll store it slightly differently in both places using the same data type. Okay, depending on several factors. But we don't have time to get into those, and those really don't matter. But what matters is you understand the characteristics and the dangers and the benefits that come, right, from using this. Because all too often, programmers go out there and go, man, floating points cause me so many headaches. I'm just going to use a float or a double forever. I'm always just going to use doubles, and I'll never use float. Yeah, there are huge downsides to doing that, okay? It's like your dentist saying, you know what, I'm never gonna learn how to give you a filling. We're just gonna rip that sucker out, okay? Or your doctor saying, you know what, I really don't know how to treat a bruise or a cut or maybe a muscle sprain. The only thing I know how to do is amputate. Oh man, you bruised your knuckle? Sorry, dude. Is that a problem? I mean, we joke about it. It's really extreme when we apply it to other fields, but it's the same thing we do when we just go, hey, this is the field I like. This is the data type I know. My problems go away when I use it. I don't know why. I'm just going to always use it. Okay, we need to understand the characteristics of how a computer is storing the data if we want to intelligently manipulate the data. Okay? That makes sense, though. Yes? Everybody okay with that? Awesome. So storing data is only half of the problem, though, right? Okay, storing and representing data is half of the problem. The other half of the problem is the thing that the computer arguably does more than anything else. Let's give me some blank screen here, okay? Which is transferring the data. Right? We talked about that, I think, last week, didn't we? Or the week before? That a thing the computer does more than anything else, you know, arguably is move information from point A to point B. Okay? But as information is moving along a wire, do you remember what two things come into play that caused this problems as an electrical signal traveled down a wire? Okay? We had attenuation, which is our signal gets weaker, right? And then we had interference, which also had another name, though. Induction, okay? Which is interference or noise or something else like that, where the values, as they were being transmitted, are corrupted, okay? Very often, that corruption occurs because of inductance. Sometimes it occurs because of a timing issue. Sometimes it just simply occurs because something was lost or misplaced along the way, and the computer assumed a value. Okay, because one thing to keep in mind is computers always have a value. Okay, we live in a world that can be yes or no, or maybe, or a billion shades in between. Okay, computers are binary. They are yes or they are no. They are on, they are off. There is no middle ground. Okay, so if it's supposed to be on, but it's not, what's the only option for it? Off. Okay, there is no absence of data in a computer. That does not exist. Okay, even when something's not received, it gets something, and it has to figure out from that something it wasn't what it expected to receive, and therefore it didn't get it. Okay, but there is always something there because we only have high voltage, we only have low voltage. There is no middle ground. Okay, nope, computer don't do it. You got high voltage and low voltage. That's it. Positive or negative, essentially, you know, is what we oftentimes think of it too, to really simplify it and maybe make some electrical engineers cringe. Okay, but that's the basis behind a computer. Okay, so as data is transmitted, though, we have to be able to tell when it screws up. Okay, and there are several approaches because computers do it all the time. So what we want to talk about is I want to discuss 4 different types of what we call error correction, and detection. Probably should put it the other way, error detection and correction, but I really don't want to rewrite it. Okay, error corrections and error detection schemes. Okay, some things will be capable of detecting problems, some things will be able to do fix, and there are some strategies that can do both for us. Okay, so let's start at the simplest and work our way to the most complex. Okay, on the simplest end of the spectrum, we have what is called parity. Okay, now this is the format that, and sometimes this error detection is built into the data type itself. Sometimes it's used as part of the protocol on the bus. that was responsible for transmitting the information. It kind of moves around. Sometimes it's in both places, honestly. So parity, this is what ASCII uses, just for information's sake, because we learned ASCII last week. Parity is by far the simplest type of error detection and correction. Okay, it's kind of like playing odd or even almost. What the computer is going to do in parity is we will append a single bit to the end. Okay, and we will use that and run a mathematical calculation. So we will add. So for example, let's say I was supposed to transmit 1, 0, 0, 1. Okay. Parity says if I add each of my individual bits together, do I end up with an odd number or do I end up with an even number? What do I have here? If I add these two together, this number is what? Odd or even? Okay. It's a 9, which is odd, but how many bits are on? 2. There is 2, odd or even. It's actually an even value because it's not the numerical equivalent, it's bits, right? Okay, so we don't want to think of it as a 9 anymore because do you know for sure that is a 9? We don't. We don't have a context to it. We don't know what it is, right? So parity looks at each of the bits individually to say odd or even. In this case, we're going to say even. So we would append a parity bit, right? That says, for example, okay, we had an even value or we had an odd value if we had something like this, okay? That single bit, and then when it's received on the other end, we look at that parity bit and we rerun the same calculation, okay? And we look to say, does our results match, right? I transmit 1001 with a 0, I shoot it off the other end gets 10010. I assume my transmission was successful, okay? But what if instead on the other end I got 10011? What does parity tell you now? Yeah, error. Something went wrong. Do I know where it went wrong? No, I don't. Only thing a computer can do at this point is say, hey, can you send me that again? Can you say that again? Right? It's like talking to somebody on a bad cell phone connection. You're like, what was that? I didn't catch that. Oh, can you say that again? You feel like the computer feels like the Verizon guy a little bit. Can you hear me now? All the time. Okay. What if, though, hypothetically speaking, I transmitted and the computer received this?
It wouldn't detect anything going on.
But was the value correct? Shoot. And therein comes the primary weakness of parity, okay? Parity is capable of detecting single bit errors. Now there's some cases where you can create situations where other things will cause it, but we're looking at just detecting single bit errors. Can I tell you where it went wrong? So why did this one pass? Right. How many bits were transposed? Was it a single bit that transmitted incorrectly? I had 2 go wrong, right? What if I sent this? Pass or fail? Uh-oh. Okay. Again, parity is only capable of detecting what type of error? Single bits, right? See how we have a problem? Because odd, even, odd, result of calculation, pass, right? Because it doesn't know the original value, okay? Parity, though, why would we use parity? Obviously, we can see it has a lot of weaknesses, but why would we use it then? Well, yeah, but I can jump off the building. It doesn't mean I should.
Well, if you have an error, it's the back, right?
Yeah, it does. The errors that it does catch, it's very quick at doing it, but it's simple and it only takes one extra bit. Or in some cases, there's schemes that they put together that'll use maybe a couple of bits to detect, you know, more exotic single bit errors. Okay, to try to handle these, this would be an exotic error, something like this. Okay, it's still parity though is still limited in general to catching just single bit errors. Okay, we use it though because it's simple, it's quick, it's fast. It's just when we need a little bit of an extra check. There's not a whole lot of data along with it, right? Because what happens is there are more bits transmitted.
There's something so wrong.
Yeah, and not just go wrong, but then to go wrong and go unnoticed. So parity works really well for really small values because the smaller the value is, the more likelihood it'll catch anything that goes wrong. The more bits involved, the more likelihood it'll just go right under the rug and never be noticed. Okay, so we use parity to catch what kind of errors again? Single bit errors. Okay, now parity though, as you've seen, any long piece of data or lots of bits going wrong, it all goes out the window. Okay, so as with everything in a computer, we said there's got to be a better way. So in comes our next scheme, which is called CRC. Okay, stands for cyclic redundancy check. Okay, cyclic redundancy check. Now, a cyclic redundancy check works by, instead of appending a parity bit, we are now going to append a syndrome. Okay, think of the bad guy in Incredibles. You guys remember the evil villain with the big S? His name was Syndrome. That's how you can remember him. Okay, CRC appends a syndrome to a number. Now let's talk about what that means. So the general idea of parity is sound. The fact that we look at the data that we have that's valid, perform some mathematical calculation over it, and send the result of that calculation. Then on the other end, we do the same process and check our answers. Okay, that's the general process parity used. Its weakness was in the fact that it's only using a single bit to append the results, right? Meaning I'm very limited.
So, what could go wrong in the situation where they don't get the same answer, basically? Or is it only attenuation and indefinite and change the data transfer?
Generally, yes. Now, there are, malicious users that can utilize induction, something like that. In fact, there's a new hack that Google recently released. This is creepy. That if they know the way, for example, the physical way your RAM is architected, the way that it's physically constructed, they can change certain sets of bits and change other bits that aren't even related because of inductance through it. So they're hacking the hardware. And there's no protection from that at that point. But by inductance is really the biggest way that it all happens. So attenuation does happen, but we generally, when we build networking systems and computing systems like this, we know what the attenuated limits are, and we're going to put limits on those. That's why you can't have, say, for example, a USB cable running from here to the parking lot, because it's going to attenuate too fast and the transmission is going to be garbage by the time it gets there. But I could have one run from me to the front row easily. So we know those hard limits. It's generally inductance that comes up and bites us in the butt because we can't really control it. I can control more easily how big I make a cable. So yeah, it's inductance that usually kills us. So our signal's going along, it gets inducted, okay? We're going to use syndromes now. So the biggest weakness in parity came because it was a single bit. Syndrome says, and CRC says, well, what if instead I just make a hash? I.e., I look at it, I perform an algorithm, and I append a lot more data. Is it still possible for it to go undetected? Yes. But now we're playing a statistical game, right? What are the odds of it going undetected? Absolutely, it does. So CRC often uses something like SHA-1 or other cryptographically secure algorithms. SHA-1 is probably a bad example because it was just recently cracked by Google. But MD5, you know, whenever you go, like if you guys have ever downloaded open source software, it'll say, hey, here's your checksum. Guess what that is? That's a syndrome. A checksum is a syndrome. It's a value to check the summation. If you run the same calculation again, bam, that's your results. That is a syndrome. The difference is they're publishing it rather than appending it within the data itself.
Nothing went wrong in transit because something could go wrong when you're downloading. And two, if some malicious person got two set files, that would.
Yes.
Oh yeah, this is not the same file.
It checks authenticity. In fact, most of our cryptographical standards are based on that same concept by applying a signature. It can, absolutely. The difference, though, comes in the size now. Instead of having a single bit go wrong, you've got to have, you know, say 30, 60, 128, 256, depending on it. Most of the time, checksums tend to be at least 256 bits and beyond. I've seen them all the way up to 2048 in terms of numbers of bits. In fact, using SHA-1 as an example, Google knew mathematically that it was possible to create a collision where we would have two different sources that all resulted in the same thing. It took them 5 years of raw computing power, even knowing how to do it, to force it to happen. Because the odds are just so astronomically high. And honestly, when we talk about cryptography in a computer, that's the game you play. You say, well, it can be broken. In fact, every cryptographic standard we know today can easily be broken. It's just, it takes too much computing power to do it. You know, it'd take a supercomputer running for 2,000 years to get there. So we just say, it's secure because nobody's going to spend 2,000 years to try to break it. Because by then, who cares, right? Until quantum computing comes out, and what was going to take 2,000 years takes now 5 milliseconds. And you wonder why the NSA has all of your data. Okay, but jokes about the NSA aside, okay, that's what we're looking for. Okay, CRC is like parity, but now we're going to append a syndrome, a much larger piece of data that when I run the previous data through the same algorithm and I compare the two, then I can check, okay? But do I know where something went wrong? I still don't know where it went wrong. I just simply know something went wrong. So what's my only solution? Request retransmission, okay? Now, are there going to be situations where retransmission is very difficult or perhaps even impossible to do? Okay, can you think of any? No, not once. I mean, impossible, actually impossible to retransmit.
I know like network computing and PC keyboard and screen information was sent 5 seconds ago can't be sent that long to last.
Okay, going along with that, what if the data itself only existed in the stream? Then there's no resending it, right? You guys want a real common example of something you do every day that is unretransmittable, unless maybe you're the NSA. You guys ever talk on your phone? Okay, anybody use a cell phone today? A modern one. I'm not talking like a dumb phone. I'm talking like, you know, the fairly modern smartphone, you know, like later iPhones, you know, later S phones, some of the latest Nexuses, those types of things. Samsung Galaxy S's, you know, those types of things. But most of these new phones now use a technique called VoIP. Voice over Internet Protocol, i.e. your voice is translated to digital bits on the fly as you talk. Can you ask somebody to recreate precisely 1/100th of a second worth of audio that was 3 seconds ago? Can your phone be like, oh, remake that sound? I totally lost that, dude. Sorry. Can you make that sound again? So can it be retransmitted? So instead, the data just drops out, or it loses it, or other problems like that, okay? So there are situations where we simply can't recreate it. And this goes back to those same roots, okay? This next one has its roots in World War II. Okay, this is called a Hamming code. We do use this in computers, not incredibly a ton because it has an immense overhead. Okay, Hamming codes, any fans of World War II, it was developed to go along with, you know, when they would send coded transmissions, right, or secret transmissions. Your agent in the field, he had one shot to send that thing, and you had that one shot to get it. And if something got lost along the way or was corrupted along the way, there wasn't like message your spy back and say, hey, dude, I know you just risked your life to send it, but I totally clustered that. Can you send it again? Shoot, you got shot? Dang it. My bad. Sorry, dude. Okay, that's the problem. There are often situations where we cannot resend it. Okay, so Hamming code was developed to do that. Okay, it is built on the concept of parity, actually, where we encode now Hamming data based on a Hamming distance. So we interleave parity bits within the data, and the closer those parity bits are within the data, the more mathematically likely I can say not just what went wrong, but where it went wrong. Okay, so rather than saying big transmission, itty bitty parity bit on the end, I say here's a transmission with a whole bunch of them spread throughout. Does that make sense? Okay. The frequency that they occur within them is known as the Hamming distance. Okay. Now, as Hamming distance decreases, meaning the distance between those things, the amount of Hamming codes, that's what we call those parity bits that we interleave in, increases significantly. Okay. One of the big reasons we don't use Hamming code today in huge volumes in computing is to get really accurate with it. You're sometimes sending data on 2-to-1 ratio now. Meaning for every one bit of trying to send data, you know, for every one piece you're trying to send, you end up now sending at least 2 pieces with it. So we're doubling the data transmission sizes to really provide a lot of protection. But Hamming code, one of the cool things about it though is where you control that distance yourself, you get to dial in just how safe it needs to be. You know, does it need to be 100% perfect, guaranteed every time? There's no data loss ever. Even if it's the Hamming code itself that's corrupt, or the data itself that's corrupt, or both. We can have tiny distances and end up with data that's sent even beyond now a 2-to-1 ratio, where we can be, you know, sending 3 or 4 times the volume of information to guarantee that consistency. Or do I say it just needs to be close enough, and we shrink it down from there, okay? But it allows you to choose. The big weakness, though, is we end up appending huge volumes of data to provide a lot of protection, okay? And we still have one big weakness that occurs in here, and to some degree even within the other ones, as we saw. We cannot compensate for something called a burst error, okay? Now, this is a new term for you. A burst error is when multiple contiguous or consecutive, depending whatever term you want to use, bits are transformed. Okay, so if I had a transmission that was 1 0 0 1 0 1 0 1, it's supposed to go, but instead they got 1 0 1 0 1 0 1 1. All of this, that's a burst error, right? You see how there's multiple bits in a row that all got changed, or if they got something like this. Do I still have a burst error here? It's just a smaller one now, right? But Hamming codes, if there's a burst error at all, it goes out the window. That's why you can end up with spending data 3 or 4 times in volume to protect it, so that if those burst errors, you can just throw those pieces away and move on to another piece and still replicate the data. Does that make sense? Okay. So burst errors, none of these 3, okay? At parity, CRC, and Hamming code cannot compensate for burst errors. So in comes the last one that I want to talk about, okay? Known as Reed-Solomon, okay? Cool characteristics about Reed-Solomon, okay, is it doesn't have the dependence on huge data densities that it does, as say Hamming codes do, for example, but it is capable of detecting large errors and burst errors, even of a fairly substantial size, say 16 out of 220 odd bits. It's still capable of not only saying what bits went wrong, but it can fix them on the other side. Okay. Now I'm not going to get into how it works because that would take the best part of a semester all by itself. It's based on an entire specialized branch of mathematics called Galois mathematics, which is far deeper than we have time to go to in this class. Okay. But because of its efficiency in detection and correction, as well as low overhead space, we use it heavily, especially in network transmissions. For example, it's not uncommon at all to find in many of your network cards a chip that's only purpose is Reed-Solomon. Circuits that are designed to handle the mathematics quickly and efficiently on the way out and on the way back in. Because it's a really quick way, because when we have a network transmitting a whole bunch of data, we don't want to waste a ton of time retransmitting, because every time computer A and B have to retransmit to each other, they're blocking the lines so that, say, B and C or D and E can't talk to each other, right? So we don't want to congest it. So Reed-Solomon is super helpful to that, okay? Now, all of these things are really critical because, one, data is going to be transmitted. It's just a fact of life. Right? Is a computer going to do us any good without the ability to transmit data? No. So we need to be able to detect it and hopefully be able to correct it, okay? Because, in fact, it'll surprise you as we get later on in the semester. In a couple of weeks, we're going to examine the way hard drives work. And as a very rude awakening for many of you, you'll find out that most of your hard drive, most of the time, in fact, like 90% of the time, a computer doesn't actually store the data you asked it to store. It just gets close and uses math to figure out what was most likely what you meant on the other end. So that picture of grandma, maybe someday will go sideways and it won't be. That's how files can get corrupted along the way. You know, other problems as you get in it, you'll see that while you tell the computer to store something and it'll do its best, oftentimes it uses math and these kinds of techniques to figure out what you most likely meant and roll with it from there. Kind of disturbing all at the same time too, though, isn't it? Think about your bank's hard drive going, well, I think this was what his account balance was. It was probably this one. Yeah, let's just go with it.
That could be good or bad.
It could be good, bad, or good. Depends on what the guy next to you has, right? Okay. But does that make sense? It is. Absolutely. A little bit disturbing. But it's the reality of it. But because of the type of math we can do and because of how good we've gotten at math, how many of you have ever noticed that your hard drive doesn't actually store the data that you've asked it to store? Yeah, exactly. The average person almost always cannot tell. It's only very rare cases where multiple things have all gone wrong simultaneously before we notice it. Because we've gotten good enough at detecting errors and fixing them before anybody notices. Like I said at the beginning of class today, computers make mistakes all the time. They just fix them before we notice. Okay? All right, questions about today? No? Okay, well, have a wonderful long weekend. Go do something fun for the holiday. I'm going to go find some sun down south. Yeah. Yeah, we got Memorial Holiday. So we will see you all Tuesday morning, bright and early, and we are going to start into digital logic. Now, getting down to it and looking at how do computers start to function now from that digital level and building our way up, because now we've got enough foundation, we can start throwing some of that stuff at you. Okay? See you Tuesday. Don't forget your quiz is due on Sunday. Okay?